Let's suppose that we're working with this QL language. It has the names J, K, and O, referring to James, Katya, and Oscar, respectively. It has a one-place predicate P that expresses the property of liking pizza, a one-place predicate T that expresses the property of being a toddler, a two-place predicate F that expresses the is friends with relation, and a two-place predicate N that expresses the is neighbors with relation. The domain of quantification is all people. Let's work through some simple translations from English into this language. We'll start with if James is friends with Oscar, then Oscar is friends with James. The first thing to notice is that this is a conditional, so we just have to translate the antecedent, James is friends with Oscar, and the consequent, Oscar is friends with James, and then stick an arrow in between, and we're done. To translate James is friends with Oscar, it helps to first reconceptualize that as the claim that James stands in the friends with relation to Oscar. And then remember that rather than writing JFO to express that, which would more closely mirror how we say things in English, in QL, we always put the predicate first. So we write FJO, which you could read as saying that the friends with relation holds between James and Oscar in that order. In other words, James is friends with Oscar. Now, to say Oscar is friends with James is just to say that the friends with relation holds between Oscar and James in that order. So we would write FOJ, and that completes our translation. One note before we move on to the next example, the friends with relation is at least normally a symmetrical relation in the sense that if a first person is friends with a second, then it's also true that the second is friends with the first. But lots of relations are not like that. Love, famously, is not like that. One person can love another without that person loving them back. So in general, we do have to be careful about order when it comes to relations. There's an important difference between LJO, James loves Oscar, and LOJ, Oscar loves James. Next, let's look at Katya is not neighbors with herself, but she is friends with herself. Here there are two things being asserted, that Katya is not neighbors with herself and that she is friends with herself. So we have a conjunction where the first conjunct is that Katya is not neighbors with herself, and the second conjunct is that she is friends with herself. To say that Katya is not neighbors with herself is just to deny that she is neighbors with herself. So we just need to negate the claim that she is neighbors with herself. And to say that she's neighbors with herself is to say that the neighbors with relation holds between Katya and herself, which can be rendered as NKK. So we write not NKK to say that she's not neighbors with herself. To say that she's friends with herself, we then write FKK, and that completes the translation. Next, let's do someone likes pizza. To translate this, we need to use a quantifier. There are two types of quantifiers in QL languages: universal quantifiers, which allow you to say that everything in the domain meets a certain condition, and existential quantifiers, which allow you to say that there's at least one thing in the domain that meets a certain condition. Someone likes pizza can be rephrased in such a way that we can translate it using an existential quantifier, because we can rephrase that to there is something X in the domain such that X likes pizza. So we can translate it as there is an X, PX. In theory, we could rephrase someone likes pizza in such a way that we could instead translate it using a universal quantifier, because we could rephrase it as it's not the case that everything X in the domain is such that X fails to like pizza, which would become not for all X, not PX. But obviously the former translation is much more natural. Next, let's do everyone is friends with Oscar. We can rephrase this as everything X in the domain is such that X is friends with Oscar. So we get for all X, FXO. Next, let's try there is a toddler that doesn't like pizza. This can be rephrased as there is an X in the domain such that X is a toddler and X does not like pizza. So we get there is an X such that TX and not PX. Finally, let's do no one is neighbors with Katya. There are two fairly natural ways to translate this that are ultimately equivalent. Perhaps the most natural translation is the one that we get by rephrasing this sentence to, it's not the case that there is someone who is neighbors with Katya. In other words, it's not the case that there is an X in the domain such that X is neighbors with Katya, which gives us not there is an X and XK. We arrive at the other translation by rephrasing the original sentence to, everyone is such that they fail to be neighbors with Katya. In other words, everything X in the domain is such that it's not true that X is neighbors with Katya, which gives us, for all X, not NXK.